Good afternoon, everyone. I see Lito, Preeti, Sunanda, Shelley, you're here. Nice to see you. We are reading the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, and we're on the chapter The Master, page 953, if you're following along. And we're down sort of near the bottom of the page. It was afternoon. M and a few other devotees were seated near the Master. Narendra came in. He looked, as the Master used to say, like an unsheathed sword. Narendra sat down near the Master and within his hearing expressed his utter annoyance with women. He told the devotees what an obstacle women were in the path to God realization. Sri Ramakrishna made no response. He listened to Narendra. Narendra said again, I want peace. I do not even care for God. Sri Ramakrishna looked at him intently without uttering a word. Now and then Narendra chanted, Brahman is truth, knowledge, the infinite. It was 8 o'clock in the evening. Sri Ramakrishna sat on his bed. A few devotees sat on the floor in front of him. Surendra arrived from his office. He carried in his hands 4 oranges and 2 garlands of flowers. Now he looked at the Master and now at the devotees. He unburdened his heart to Sri Ramakrishna. Surendra looking at M and the others. I have come after finishing my office work, I thought. What is the good of standing on 2 boats at the same time? So I finished my duties first and then came here. Today is the first day of the year. It is also Tuesday, an auspicious day to worship the Divine Mother. But I didn't go to Kali Ghat. I said to myself, it will be enough if I see him who is Kali herself and who has rightly understood Kali. Sri Ramakrishna smiled. Surendra, it is said that a man should bring fruit and flowers when visiting his guru or a holy man. So I have brought these. To the Master, I am spending all this money for you. God alone knows my heart. Some people feel grieved to give away a penny, and there are people who spend 1,000 rupees without feeling any hesitation. God sees the inner love of a devotee and accepts his offerings. Sri Ramakrishna said to Surendra by a nod that he was right. Surendra, I couldn't come here yesterday. It was the last day of the year, so I decorated your picture with flowers. Sri Ramakrishna said to M by a sign, what devotion. Surendra, as I was coming here, I bought these 2 garlands for 4 annas. Almost all the devotees took their leave. The Master asked M to stroke his legs and fan him. Friday, April 16th, 1886. The moon was shining brightly, flooding the garden paths, the trees, and the water of the lake with its white rays. Girish, M, Latu, and a few other devotees were sitting on the steps leading to the lake. The house stood to the west of the lake. A lamp burnt in the Master's room on the 2nd floor. Sri Ramakrishna was sitting on his bed. There were several devotees in the room. A few minutes later, Girish and M were strolling along a garden path lined with flowering plants and fruit trees. M, how beautiful this moonlight is. Perhaps nature has had the same laws from time out of mind. Girish, how do you know that? M, there is no change in the uniformity of nature. European scientists have been discovering new stars through the telescope. There are mountains on the moon. They have seen them. Girish, it is difficult to be sure of that. It is hard for me to believe it. Why? Why? The mountains have been observed through the telescope. Girish, how can you be sure that they have been rightly observed? Suppose there are other things between the moon and the earth. Light passing through them might conjure up such a vision. Narendra, Rakal, Niranjan, Sarat, Shashi, Baburam, Kali, Jogan, Latu, and a few other young devotees had been living at the Kasipur garden house in order to nurse Sri Ramakrishna. That list of names is basically most of the direct disciples who took. Let's see, Swami Brahmananda, Swami Niranjanananda, Swami Sardananda, Swami Ramakrishnananda, Swami Premananda, Swami Abhedananda, Swami Yogananda, and Swami Adbhutananda. Those are the same people as Rakal, Niranjan, Sarat, Shashi, Baburam, Kali, Jogan, and Latu. So they're pre-monastic names. That evening, Narendra, Kali, and Tarak, who became Swami Shivananda, had gone to Dakshineshwar. They were going to spend the night in the Panchavati meditating on God. Girish, Latu, and M went to Sri Ramakrishna's room and found him sitting on the bed. Shashi and one or two devotees had been tending the master. Baburam, Niranjan, and Rakal also entered the room. It was a large room. Some medicines and a few other accessories were kept near the bed. One entered the room by a door at the north end. Sri Ramakrishna had to be tended all night. The devotees stayed awake by turns. The devotee who tended him fixed Sri Ramakrishna's mosquito net and then either lay on a mat on the floor or spent the night sitting up. Since Ramakrishna got very little sleep on account of his illness, his attendant, too, slept very little. And this is his final illness with throat cancer. That evening, Sri Ramakrishna was somewhat better. The devotees saluted the master and sat down on the floor. The master asked him to bring the lamp near him. He greeted Girish cordially. Master to Girish, "Are you quite well?" To Latu, "Prepare a smoke for him and give him a betel leaf." A few minutes afterwards, he asked Latu to give Girish some refreshments. Latu said that they had been sent for. Sri Ramakrishna was sitting up. A devotee offered some garlands of flowers. Sri Ramakrishna put them around his neck one by one. Was he thus worshiping God who dwelt in his heart? The devotees looked at him wonderingly. He took 2 garlands from his neck and gave them to Girish. Every now and then Sri Ramakrishna asked whether the refreshments had been brought. M was fanning the master. On the bed was a sandalwood fan, the offering of a devotee. The master gave it to M, who continued to fan him with it. He also gave M 2 garlands. M had lost a son, aged 7 or 8, about a year and a half before. The child had seen the master many a time. Latu was telling Sri Ramakrishna about M. Latu, M wept bitterly last night at the sight of some books that had belonged to his dead child. His wife is almost mad with grief. She sometimes treats her other children violently. She creates a scene at home because he spends the night here now and then. Sri Ramakrishna seemed worried to hear of this. Girish, it is nothing to be wondered at. Even after receiving the instruction of the Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna fainted from grief at the death of his son, Abhimanyu. Girish was given the refreshments on a tray. Sri Ramakrishna took a grain, and Girish accepted the rest as prasad. He sat in front of the master and began to eat. He needed to drink water. There was an earthen jug in the southeast corner of the room. It was the month of April, and the day was hot. Sri Ramakrishna said, "There's some nice water here." The master was so ill that he had not enough strength even to stand up. But what did the disciples see to their utter amazement? They saw him leave the bed, completely naked, and move toward the jug. He himself was going to pour the water into a tumbler. The devotees were almost frozen with fear. The master poured the water into a glass. He poured a drop or two into his hand to see whether it was cool. He found that it was not very cool, but since nothing better could be found, he reluctantly gave it to Girish. Girish was eating the sweets. The devotees were sitting about, and M was fanning Sri Ramakrishna. Girish to the master, Deben Babu has decided to renounce the world. On account of his illness, Sri Ramakrishna could hardly talk. Touching his lips with his finger, he asked Girish by signs, "Who will feed his wife and his children?" Girish, "I don't know." The other devotees remained silent. Girish began talking again while he ate the refreshments. Girish, "Sir, which is wiser, to renounce the world regretfully, or to call on God leading a householder's life?" Master to M, "Haven't you read the Gita? One truly realizes God if one performs one's worldly duties in a detached spirit. If one lives in the world after realizing that, everything is illusory. Those who regretfully renounce the world belong to an inferior class. Do you know what a householder jnani is like? He is like a person living in a glass house. He can see both inside and outside." Again there was silence in the room. Master to M, "The refreshments are hot and good?" M to Girish, "Yes, they were brought from Fagu's shop. The place is famous." Master smiling, "Yes, famous." Girish, "They are really nice." To the master, "Sir, my mind is now on a lofty plane. Why does it come down again?" Master, "That always happens when one leads a worldly life. Sometimes the householder's mind goes up, sometimes it goes down. Sometimes he feels a great deal of devotion, sometimes he feels less. This happens because he lives in the midst of lust and greed. Sometimes a householder contemplates God or chants his name, and sometimes he diverts his mind to lust and greed. He is like an ordinary fly, which now sits on a sweetmeat and now on filth or rotting sores. But it is quite different for sannyasis. They are able to fix their minds on God alone, completely withdrawing them from lust and greed. They can enjoy the bliss of God alone. A man of true renunciation cannot enjoy anything but God. He leaves any place where people talk of worldly things. He listens only to spiritual talk. A man of true renunciation never speaks about anything but God. The bees light only on flowers in order to sip honey. They do not enjoy anything else. Girish went to the small terrace to rinse his hands. Master to M, a man needs the grace of God to fix his whole mind on him. Well, Girish has eaten a great many sweets. Tell him not to eat anything else tonight. Girish returned to the room and sat in front of the master. He was chewing a betel leaf. Master to Girish, Rakhal has now understood what is good and what is bad, what is real and what is unreal. He lives with his family, no doubt, but he knows what it means. He has a wife, and a son has been born to him. But he has realized that all these are illusory and impermanent. Rakhal will never be attached to the world. Rakhal became Swami Brahmananda. He is like a mudfish. The fish lives in the mud, but there is not the slightest trace of mud on its body. Girish, sir, I don't understand all this. You can make everyone pure and unattached if you want to. You can make everyone good, whether he is a worldly man or a sannyasi. The Malaya breeze, I believe, turns all trees into sandalwood. Master, not unless there is substance in them. There are a few trees, the cotton tree, for instance, which are not turned into sandalwood. Girish, I don't care. Master, but this is the law. Girish, but everything about you is illegal. The devotees were listening to this conversation in great amazement. Every now and then the fan in M's hand stopped moving. Master, yes, that may be true. When the river of bhakti overflows, the land all around is flooded with water to the depth of a pole. When a man is inebriated with divine love, he doesn't abide by the injunctions of the Vedas. He picks durva grass for the worship of the deity, but he doesn't clean it. He picks whatever he lays his hands on. While gathering tulsi leaves, he even breaks the branches. Ah, what a state of mind I passed through. When one develops love of God, one needs nothing else. M. Yes, sir. Master, but a devotee must assume toward God a particular attitude. God, in his incarnation as Rama, demonstrated Shanta, Dasya, Vatsalya, and Sakya, but Krishna demonstrated Madhur besides all these. Radha cherished the attitude of Madhur towards Krishna. Her love was romantic. But in the case of Sita, it was the pure love of a chaste wife for her husband. There was no romance in her love. But all this is the Leela of God. He demonstrates different ideals to suit different times. A crazy woman used to accompany Vijay Goswami to the Kali temple at Dakshineshwar and sing for Sri Ramakrishna. Her songs were about Kali. She also used to sing the songs of the Brahmo Samaj. The devotees called her Pugli, and it's the Bengali word for crazy woman, and tried to keep her away from the master. Master to Girish and the others. Pugli cherishes the attitude of Madhur towards me. One day she came to Dakshineshwar. Suddenly she burst out crying. Why are you crying? I asked her. And she said, oh, my head is aching. Everyone laughed. Another day I was eating when she came to Dakshineshwar. She suddenly said, won't you be kind to me? I had no idea what was passing through her mind and went on eating. Then she said, why did you push me away mentally? I asked her, what is your attitude? She said, Madhur. Ah, I said, but I look on all women as manifestations of the Divine Mother. All women are mothers to me. Thereupon she said, I don't know all that. Then I called Ramlal and said to him, Ramlal, listen to her. What is she talking about, this pushing away mentally? Even now she keeps up that attitude. Girish, blessed indeed is Pugli. Maybe she is crazy, maybe she is beaten by the devotees, but she meditates on you 24 hours a day. No matter how she meditates on you, no harm can ever befall her. Sir, how can I express my own feelings about it? Think what I was before and what I have become now by meditating on you. Formerly I was indolent. Now that indolence has turned into resignation to God. Formerly I was a sinner. Now I have become humble. What else can I say? The devotees remained silent. Rakal expressed his sympathy for Pugli. He said, we all feel sorry for her. She causes so much annoyance, and for that she suffers too. Niranjan to Rakal. You feel that way for her because you have a wife at home, but we could kill her. Rakal sharply, "Such bragging! How dare you utter such words before him?" Meaning Sri Ramakrishna. Master to Girish, "Lust and greed alone is the world. Many people regard money as their very lifeblood. But however you may show love for money, one day, perhaps, every bit of it will slip from your hand. In our part of the country, the farmers make narrow ridges around their paddy fields. You know what those ridges are. Some farmers make ridges with great care all the way around their fields. Such ridges are destroyed by the great rush of rainwater. But some farmers leave a part of the ridge open and put sod there. The water flows through the sod, leaving the field covered with silt after the rain. They reap a rich harvest. They alone make good use of their money, who spend it for the worship of God or the service of holy men and devotees. Their money bears fruit. I cannot eat anything offered by physicians. I mean those who traffic in human suffering. Their money is blood and pus." Sri Ramakrishna mentioned 2 physicians in this connection. Girish, "Dr. Rajendra Dutta is a very generous man. He doesn't accept a penny from anyone. He gives away money in charity." Saturday, April 17, 1886. It was the night of the full moon. For some time, Narendra had been going to Dakshineshwar daily. He spent a great deal of time in the Panchavati in meditation and contemplation. This day, he returned from Dakshineshwar in the evening. Tarak and Kali were with him. It was 8 o'clock in the evening. Moonlight and the south wind added to the charm of the garden house. Many of the devotees were meditating in the room downstairs. Referring to them, Narendra said to M, "They are shedding their upadhis one by one." A few minutes later, M came into Sri Ramakrishna's room and sat down on the floor. The master asked him to wash his towel in the spittoon. M washed them in the reservoir. Next morning, Sri Ramakrishna sent for M. After taking his bath in the Ganga and saluting the master, he had gone to the roof. Sri Ramakrishna asked M to bring his grief-stricken wife to the garden house, where she could have her meal. The master said to M by a sign, "Ask her to come. Let her stay here a couple of days. She may bring the baby." M, "Yes, sir. It would be fine if she developed intense love for God." Sri Ramakrishna again answered by signs, "Oh, grief pushes out devotion." And he was such a big boy. Krishna Kishore had 2 sons. They were of the same age as Bhavanath, and each had 2 university degrees. They both died, and Krishna Kishore, jnani that he was, could not at first control himself. How lucky I am that I have none. Arjuna was a great jnani, and Krishna was his constant companion. Nevertheless, he was completely overwhelmed with grief at the death of his son Abhimanyu. "Why doesn't Kishori come?" A devotee. "He comes to the Ganga every day for his bath." Master, "But why doesn't he come here?" Devotee, "I shall ask him, sir. I shall ask him to come, sir." Master, "Why doesn't Harish come?" 2 young girls, aged 9 and 10, who belonged to M's family, sang several songs about the Divine Mother for the Master. They had sung for him when he had visited M's house at Shampukur. The Master was very much pleased with their songs. After they had finished, they were sent for by the devotees to sing for them downstairs. Master to M, "Don't teach the girls any more songs. It is different if they sing spontaneously, but they will lose their modesty by singing before anyone and everyone. It is very necessary for women to be modest." Flowers and sandal paste were placed before the master in a flower basket. He sat on his bed and worshipped himself with these offerings. Sometimes he placed flowers and sandal paste on his head, sometimes on his throat, sometimes on his heart, and sometimes on his navel. Manamahan of Kanagar came in and took a seat after saluting the master. Sri Ramakrishna was still busy with the worship of his inner self. He put a garland of flowers on his neck. After a while, he seemed to be pleased with Manamahan and gave him some flowers. M too received a flower. It was about 9 o'clock in the morning. The master and M were talking. Shashi was also in the room. Master to M, what were Narendra and Shashi talking about? What did they discuss? M to Shashi, what were you talking about? Shashi, it was Naranjan that told you about. Was it Naranjan that told you about it? Master, what were you discussing? I heard God, being, non-being, and so forth. Shashi smiling, shall I call Narendra? Master, yes. Narendra came in and took a seat. Master to M, ask him something. To Narendra, tell us what you were talking about. Narendra, I have indigestion. What's there to tell you about? Master, you will get over your indigestion. M smiling, tell us about the experience of Buddha. Narendra, have I become a Buddha that you want me to talk about him? M, what does Buddha say about the existence of God? Narendra, how can you say that God exists? It is you who have created the universe. Don't you know what Berkeley says about it? M, yes, I do. According to him, esse is percipi. The existence of external objects depends on their perception. The world exists as long as the sense organs perceive it. Master, Nanta used to say, the world exists in mind alone and disappears in mind alone. But as long as I consciousness exists, one should assume the servant and master relationship with God. Narendra to M, how can you prove by reasoning that God exists? But if you depend on faith, then you must accept the relationship of servant and master. And if you accept that, and you can't help it, then you must also say that God is kind. You think only of the suffering in the world. Why do you forget that God has also given you so much happiness? How kind he is to us. He has granted us 3 very great things: human birth, the yearning to know God, and the companionship of a great soul. All were silent. And I think we will stop there this evening, which is kind of right in the middle of no breaks at all. And does anyone have anything they would like to comment on or ask about? Okay. I'm sorry?
This is Preeti. I had a question.
Okay.
It's, maybe your thoughts on modesty, as the subject came up.
The practice of modesty for women.
Mm-hmm. The practice of...
Yeah.
And you have a question about... Well, the question of modesty... Modesty would be in today's society. Modesty
Yes.
Modesty is not pushing yourself forward, not making people, not trying to create a sensation when you walk into a room, not trying to get everyone to notice you, not, as someone used to say, there are two different ways people enter a room. Some people enter a room and they say, there you are. Other people enter a room and says, here I am. Now, modesty would be, there you are. It's actually a form of unselfishness or not being centered in yourself, being modest, being concerned about others before yourself. Now, modesty also would be, I can't go there. Not dressing intentionally provocatively. Now, I'm saying intentionally because so often the fashion of the day, people are following it, but they have no intention of provocation. So a lot has to do, I grew up in the 60s when the skirts went up to wherever, and we did it because everyone else was doing it. And it had no, it was just, that was the fashion. But when you become aware of what you're doing, then to moderate your behavior in an appropriate way would be considered modesty, I would think. Does that answer? Okay.
Yes, Mataji. Thank you so much.
Okay. And tomorrow is Halloween, and we're going to have a talk on the veil of ignorance. Now, I think it's very appropriate for Halloween because we're all trying to wear masks and carry on. We will have the reading for Seekers of God on Wednesday at 5 p.m. here in the temple and on Zoom and on YouTube. And we will have the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna next Saturday. I'm trying to get this straight because Swami Satchidayananda comes on the 13th, and then we have the Katha Upanishad. But on the 6th, we will have the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna at 5 p.m. And so I hope to see you all then. And we'll end with the chant. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat Sri Ramakrishna Arpanam.